Welcome to the Gigless Podcast, a podcast showcasing the works and talents of those who lost their gigs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This podcast will feature a range of creatives from the tri-state area who are young visionaries and who contribute to their craft despite the recent events that have happened. Join us today as our host Remi Leibovic speaks with Jonathan Edmondson, the director, playwright, and designer from New Jersey. Jonathan serves as the artistic director and co-founder of the Stride Collective, a Philadelphia-based theater company that provides supportive space to display works that embrace the queer experience. His latest work, Diamond Peak Studios, can be viewed virtually later this year and will be featured in the show notes of this episode. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Giggles Podcast, Season 2. And today I have our lovely guest from the Philadelphia area, Jonathan Edmondson. Hi.
Hello, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, Jonathan, we kind of found each other, the Giggles Podcast, and we kind of met over the Instagram platform. And you are aligned with the Stride Collective, a Philadelphia-based theater company.
Yeah, exactly. So you had interviewed Hunter Smith, probably like one of your first episodes, and Hunter's Hunter's on the board of the Strides Collective. So some mutual followers there, and I'm the artistic director and founder of the Strides Collective, which is a Greater Philadelphia area theater group that focuses on amplifying queer stories. And we have just sort of started to officially become an entity. And that's sort of what the focus has been on this year so far.
Right. And this year being 2020 or 2021, because now we're recording this.
No, it's 2021 officially. We started it's a complicated history, but we started officially in December of 2020 with this current crew. And we've been working ever since. We have a lot planned for this year being 2021.
Right. Well, I think that I just have a good feeling about 2021. I think that I think that the resilience that everybody has shown through 2020, they're definitely carrying that confidence through resilience into 2021. And I'm excited to personally see like everyone's growth through this,
I totally agree. I think we're starting to use what we initially maybe thought were limitations to now our advantage, and, accepting, and staying in the moment and figuring out how to curb your expectations and sort of rise to meet them in a way that's positive and not negative. And I think there is also just a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel type of thing, whereas for a while last year in 2020 we didn't necessarily see that. So I agree. I'm hopeful. I'm excited about projects and things, and starting to feel a little bit more connected to art again, which is good.
What are some of the limitations that you're overcoming?
Yeah, so I'm a theater director and playwright, and most of my work, I don't know why I said most of all of my work before the pandemic was in person, of course. I direct musicals and plays throughout PA and New Jersey as a freelance director, and everything I've known has been on stage in terms of directing. In fact, theater virtually is not really theater by definition, right? Theater is meant to be performed live in front of an audience with that interaction, that shared breath. So having to shift focus and see if we wanted to continue producing theater virtually, or to sort of take a pause, take an intermission, whatever nice word you want to put on it, stop working, was sort of a big learning curve in figuring out how do we use the platforms available to us to continue making work and exploring work in a way we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So the inability to gather in the same room is a really difficult thing for a director who's used to working with an ensemble of people. And a lot of the tricks and exercises you may have and things like that, they're all meant to be done in person. Theater is a very physical entity. So without that in-personness, you sort of have to figure out a different way forward.
Right. Like, I can only imagine how, because all these virtual things that were done before, like everybody had really high grade cameras, everybody had really good setups because of the fact that they were strictly virtual. So then you had everybody's, once everybody had to go virtual, the camera quality and everything, you could just tell. So I know that I was talking to another producer the other day, and they were mentioning the camera quality and the issues with like rendering certain things out. I know that that's certainly happened to us on Gigless, where we record these interviews and then for some reason Zoom just doesn't save correctly, and I'm calling everyone back being like, please let us re-interview.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much, from people's internet connection to just the weather outside and how that affects power and electricity, and also where you can record in your house that you're probably sharing with other people. I mean, endless list of things that are obstacles, that are just new things that we're dealing with. And it's been a huge learning curve for the folks who have decided to try and make theater of some kind in this new situation. And it's also been really exciting because I've been able to do things I never would have done in person, just because of whatever different limitations, geographic limitations or content or time or length or money, whatever it is. So there have definitely been some positives too. Like I said, I think ultimately it's just been that learning curve. And it's taken sort of all of 2020 to now get to this point where, as the Strides Collective looks to do a spring digital season, we're more excited by the opportunities this gives us than the limitations. Where I think in the beginning, back in June of 2020, we were like, oh, I kind of wish we were just in the room together. I wish, it was a lot of wishing. And now it's like, okay, well, we know we can't do that. So let's just put our best foot forward into doing this virtual digital work and figure out how to make the most of that.
Absolutely. I feel that, and I know that there is an urge to definitely be in a room, especially a creative space, when you're trying to collaborate with others. And I can definitely see how, especially as theater people, that would get to you guys. But I'm glad that it's, that you all are working through it. And so let's talk a little bit about the Strides Collective. Like, why did this come up? Because you guys are a safe LGBTQIA plus space. You guys are supportive. I know that I say you guys a lot, but I promise I'm just being like group.
Totally. So I graduated college in 2017, and out of college, that fall I did the apprentice program at the Art and Theatre Company in Philly, which is a regional equity theater in Philadelphia that does plays and musicals. It's a 10-month program. You work in every aspect of the theater: production, marketing, development, front of house, stage management, artistic. You basically do everything and anything. It's an intensive 10-month program. It's really awesome. It was a great training experience. And at the end of that program, those 10 months, I produced a show in the summer at the Jersey Fringe Festival. And that was the first time I had done any sort of self-producing. The following year, I returned to the Jersey Fringe Festival with another piece called Whirlpool. That was a two-hander. So it was me, two actors, a dramaturg, and a stage manager. We kept it really small crew. And we did that for, I don't know, like 5 performances over one weekend in this town, Hamilton in South Jersey. So we had like a decent attendance, but it's not in the middle of the city. People from Philly couldn't necessarily get there, and they don't have a car, things like that. And right before our final performance, I looked at my 2 actors, Harry Watermeyer and Ryan Houghton, who are 2 awesome actors in Philly. And I said, I don't feel like we're done telling this story. I feel like there's so much more we can do. And they were like, yeah, totally. So a couple of months later, we revisited it and we decided to produce it in person. And we're now looking back, I'm super crazy thankful that we had decided to put the show up in February 2020, right around Valentine's Day for Philly Theater Week. Not knowing that in a couple of months, everything would be shut down. So we were able to get in another production of Whirlpool at the Iron Factory in Philly in February. And in order to sort of submit our materials to Theater Week and just to publicize, we needed a name, like a producing body. So we used the Strides Collective because Strides was the name of my first play that I produced. And one of my friends was like, just use Strides. And I was like, okay, that's a good placeholder. But it ended up meaning a lot in terms of the type of art we want to make. That's progressive, it's moving us forward, it's inclusive, it sort of is a great catch-all. And in terms of collective, it's a nice way of saying that, and I lead with this motto, whether I'm directing or producing or whatever, is that like theater is the ultimate collaborative experience. Everyone has their different roles and their places and their responsibilities, but together you make the product. It would falter and fail without, you know, every single piece being in place. So collective is a really nice way of keeping it a little more artistic and loose than company, and just saying, you know, like we are collectively in this project together. And that's how it started. And then over 2020, it sort of started to grow in terms of looking towards what we wanted to do in the future. And in the fall of 2020, we had interviews for full collective members, board members, and we brought them on board. And now we're planning our 2021 spring digital season. So yeah, it's been a really awesome, kind of unexpected journey. Not necessarily what I planned to do with my work, with just the Strides Collective work, but I'm really excited about where we are and the work we have coming up.
Absolutely. So for our listeners who don't know you, what is the screenplay or the play Whirlpool?
Yeah, so Whirlpool is a play that I wrote. It's a two-hander about Caleb and Blake, two people who had a intense relationship in high school and intense falling out, and sort of meet again 5 years later, right out of college, and they revisit a lot of the memories and moments from their adolescence. So it jumps around in time from when they're 15 to 24 and back again. It's a play of a bunch of vignettes, and it just explores, you know, the intimacy and connection between two people who are not necessarily sure how to love each other, but they do, and struggling with some ideas of queerness and sexuality in a really pivotal age where everyone's sort of questioning everything. And it's definitely the piece that I've worked the longest on. We had to, you know, in Jersey we had a production, then in Philly, so I had two productions of it, same actors, you know, developed the script. I don't even know how many drafts of the script there are at this point. And it's definitely the piece I'm like the proudest of. And I think that's what really cemented in me, like, this is the type of work I want to do. This is the type of audience I want to sort of like engage with, and sort of telling these very modern, contemporary queer stories that were a little more intimate, quiet, and accessible. And yeah, just kind of share those queer stories with everybody.
Right. No, that's a beautiful thing. I would have definitely gone to see it had I been in the South Jersey area circa that period of time. But, you know, I think that storytelling in any shape or form, especially when it comes from a different perspective than the, you know, mainstream perspective, is just so important. Because, and I've heard this before, said before, so I'm paraphrasing it. It's like, it's not that these stories never happened or that any of this is new. It's just that now we're all able to talk about it, and we're all able to come to the table. At least most of us are able to come to the table and understand, like, these things have always been around. They've always happened. And now society is just more open to it and supportive of it. One of the things that I know by just, you know, watching the theater community having to adapt to the pandemic and having things close is, like, I'm really grateful that your collective is focusing on, like, safe, socially distant, and digital productions, because I know that, like, if you have shows or if you have things, like, that's the biggest fear, right? Is, will it be a super spreader, or what can happen? So, like, again, I'm happy that you guys said, you know what, we're just doing a digital season, and that's going to be so interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the smartest, safest thing to do right now. And it also inevitably allows us to reach even more people because people can watch it from whatever the finished product is. People can watch it from all over and not have to worry about leaving their houses. So again, I don't think it's the way that any of us would like to fully make theater, certainly not forever. But for now, we're on board, we're embracing it, we're not fighting against it. And I think that's the biggest lesson learned in the past 6 months, probably, is like, just don't fight it, because this is what we got. So if we're interested, let's do it, and see what happens.
Absolutely. So, you know, so far you've answered most of the questions I would typically ask. And, one of my questions is, have you been returning? One of the questions that I ask everybody is like, have you been returning to the roots of your creativity in this time? Hunter, the person that you mentioned earlier, said that he was rereading a lot of old plays. So what have you been doing?
That's a really excellent question. I I think as a director, I had two different freelance gigs set up for the fall of 2020 that were in person and of course canceled. And that was a huge bummer because I was hired for those in the spring, like right before the pandemic hit, and was already in sort of pre-production for those in my head or actually meeting with people already. So that was a really big disappointment in terms of just, I think, as freelancer, I do have a day job. I work for the art and in the development department, and I'm super thankful for that, and still have that gig right now. But I try to hustle as much as possible at night. I try to direct as many shows as I can. I go on interviews for different positions, and my 9 to 5 gives me the flexibility to do work at night, which I'm super grateful for. So when all of that sort of came to a halt, it was like, okay, where does the creativity go? On the flip side, I'm also a playwright, and luckily, playwriting is always a solitary at-home activity anyway. So I was able to kind of focus a little bit more on writing plays, whereas during a normal year, if I'm working all day in an in-person rehearsal at night, the thought of staring at my laptop any longer to like write for fun or creatively is really bad. So this kind of gave me the space to do that. And of course, I think like a lot of other artists, I'm consuming even more TV than I normally would, even more books and stories and things that inherently are very inspiring. And something that I think ultimately really helped me get through last year is the Stars Collective did a production called Ignite, which was a virtual theater experience that we did in the fall of 2020. And starting in the summer, it was a devised piece of theater, and we devised it over Zoom, which was a totally new experience for me and pretty much all of the actors. But I worked with 14 other like incredibly awesome, different, and exciting young emerging theater artists in the greater Philadelphia area, and we met multiple times to devise the piece, and it was so much fun to be able to connect with those artists and have that energy and have that room and sort of safe Zoom space to create and throw out ideas. And we ultimately ended up with a product that like tackled issues in a way that wasn't super intense, but it was like, it was still super respectful. So it was like a fun project, and people were able to talk about things they want to talk about. And I think the energy of my community in that way really helped propel me forward, get me excited to keep working on the Stars Collective, working on my own writing, and I think leaning on each other in that way and keeping each other motivated for, them motivating me to write, me motivating them to act still, and or sound design or whatever was really awesome. And I had a super blast doing that. And that was most of my like summer and fall. So keeping that connection alive, because again, theater is so much about that connection. So although we couldn't be in person, that energy definitely was awesome and inspiring.
Oh no, certainly. That's like the same thing that I get from Gigless. I get so excited to be doing interviews and to be meeting new people. And I think that this has been, I do miss going to museums. I do miss going out to art galleries. I miss, hanging art galleries and organizing things with people. But, this has been the way that I've been able to put that passion onto the digital platform. So I'm excited that all these other artists and all these other art forms were able to adapt to the digital platform as well. And I want to highlight something that you have on your website, and it says that we will work to destigmatize the narrative surrounding LGBTQIA plus folk, emphasizing the future of queer storytelling is limitless. So can you explain to our listeners that might not know that there's still stigma out there, like as much as we have like RuPaul's Drag Race and all these other shows that like Trixie and Katya and all these other like shows that are showing the different types of queer folk out there, like, and all the characters that are being implemented on TV, like there's still, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. When we set out to write our vision, and that statement is part of our vision as a company, as an extremely new company that's sort of still figuring everything out. It's a tricky thing because you when you're talking about the queer community, you never want to speak for everybody or everyone's experience. What I can say though is really what speaks to me about queer storytelling and play and theater in particular is the idea that I think that we have captured down, which is the future of queer stories is limitless, meaning that a story can have a queer focus without it being the like ultimate objective of the piece is not that someone's struggling to come out, that someone is being disowned by their parents for their sexuality, that anything that is sort of what you would say is stereotypical or stories you've seen before. There are plenty of queer people who are happy, who have amazing, fulfilling, flourishing lives, who are artists and truck drivers and CEOs and farmers, and there's just a huge array of stories as you would assume, although maybe just don't think about. So I think that's really what we want to do, is to like, we want to amplify, uplift these stories, but also like say that there is no limit on what a quote unquote LGBTQIA story needs to be. It doesn't have to fit a certain mold. It doesn't need to have that coming out arc. It doesn't need to have some betrayal and backstab. You know, it can be anything. And I think we sort of talked about the word like normalize for a while, and it's hard to capture into words, but it really just means like, you know, if you look around, obviously there are people everywhere doing all sorts of things. So like, why should their stories be limited to something that really like oftentimes like a straight lens is put on of like, oh, well, like the coming out experience or what have you. So that's really what we're hoping to do. And like I said, we've just started in terms of programmatic things and putting that into practice, but we're super excited about it. And you know, I also just know that like as a queer person myself, like that's the shit I want to see. That's the stuff I want to go and experience. And I've had all different people who've seen my plays, you know, react very well to that. And so for me, I want more of that accessibility, that inclusivity of any story. So yeah, that's what I get like super excited about, and giving people an opportunity to see themselves in a way that's not limited by a stereotype.
Right. Well, you know, have, I guess, what's your audience range for the Strides Collective? Like, are you trying to be open to, you know, all ages, or so will some shows be 18 plus? Like, what is, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I guess what's the overall kind of reach?
It's been really fascinating because we had just done our first like full in-person performance. The pandemic hit, and then we did a virtual performance. In our virtual performance, we had people tune in from Portugal and Australia and Canada and all over the United States. So that was super awesome. They will not be able to see our shows in person, right? So we're still figuring out really like what our audience is, but I would say definitely 16 plus. We're not in the theater for young audiences market. And we are definitely interested in telling. The board is comprised of people right out of college in their mid to late 20s, folks like that. So we're interested in stories that sort of capture and emphasize this period. But we're not limited to anything yet. And I think we're figuring it out as we go of what works, what speaks to us, what speaks to an audience. And I mean, Whirlpool was extremely different from Ignite. And I think what we do in the spring will be even another difference. And I think that's the exciting thing about starting a company, is sort of figuring out we have our vision, we have our mission, and we're committed to that. But in terms of what the actual product ends up being and how it fits in with our audience is an exciting challenge that we're looking forward to tracking in a more official way now that we have a team to really do that audience engagement, marketing, things like that, and see who is really engaging with us the most, who should we be hitting up for other opportunities and things like that. So I can tell you that when we launched the other week submissions for our virtual playwright residency, which is an opportunity for queer writers in the quad-state area, so PA, New Jersey, Delaware, and New York. And the response so far has been awesome, and we've loved reading people's submissions and just seeing folks who very kindly just being like, thank you for having a space for queer writers to submit their work. And already that is like super touching to me and makes me think like, okay, we're going in the right direction. Like there are clearly people out there with these stories. We can't wait to uplift them and help them in the way that we can, and engage with folks who may not necessarily have a platform otherwise. So yeah, there's definitely a market out there for the artists too that we want to engage with.
Absolutely. And I think just like I read a lot of books and comics and web comics, and one of the things that irks me is when someone like tries to write about a queer character or a character that they just have no idea, like any background, and then it just feels like, forced, like they do this because they're this way. But I feel that when the person themselves identifies with that character in some way, shape, or form, that it becomes more organic from like a true real world experience versus just like projecting what your thoughts are onto that character. And another thing I wanted to ask you is like, have you always felt like an open and welcome space in the theater community, or is this something that over the years like you've had to make for yourself?
Really excellent question. I think that I have felt very welcomed I went to college at the College of New Jersey, which is near Trenton, Princeton, New Jersey. And now I work in Philly. So I've always been around this area. I've always felt very supported and included and, welcomed in different spaces. I think something that I remember in college was I was looking for published plays to propose to direct at a local community theater. And I had just worked on a show called Stop Kiss by Diana Sun, which is an excellent play that everybody should read. And it's queer focused. It's a beautiful piece of theater. And I was looking for plays like that were modern. At the time it was 20 years old, but it still felt, it was set at the late 90s in New York. It still felt extremely fresh. The topics were extremely relevant. I was looking for plays like that and published plays, and I really couldn't find many. And it was really frustrating to me to be like, where are these stories? Like, I know the playwrights are out there, I know the stories are out there, but like in terms of published work that you can like license and get rights to, it was like, I'm not finding this. So I think that was sort of the impetus to be like, I think I need to, or I would love to at some point create a space where like that work is flourishing and that work is shining, because there's a need for it, there's a want for it. And that's ultimately what is like, long story short, that's what has led to the Strides Collective. So I've certainly always felt accepted in the theater community in terms of stories of queer people. It's been, hit or miss as always. And there's been, we could talk forever about the different conversations happening in the professional theater world right now, and all of the amazing work and social justice work that's happening to sort of change a lot of the stuff.
May I ask, for our listeners that aren't familiar with that world, like what are some of the things that are happening? Because theater, all art reflects life and life reflects art. So the French Revolution was all painted, like there's no way that theater, especially something that depicts in action, stories in action.
Absolutely.
What are some of those conversations?
Yeah, so I also preface this by saying, I'm by no means like an authority on this particular topic, and there's plenty of literature out there, and I'm mostly talking about in the professional in Broadway, New York, professional equity union theater which, Strides Collective, as much as we would like to be someday, very much are non-union, any of that, but the sentiments and feelings remain the same, which is this summer, in response to the Black Lives Matter movement and years of feelings and oppression and unfair treatment, whatever word you want to say, we know what we're talking about. There was a movement called We See You White American Theater, and so much is happening Broadway for racial justice, and just about, again, I'm simplifying, there's so much more, but
Of course.
equality, about equal opportunity, about having a minimum threshold of, X amount of, if your cast is X size, X amount need to be non-white act. There's just a lot of these things that are being set into motion, and the conversations are happening at a high level that, of course, I'm nowhere near a part of, right? But like, I see it on social media and I keep up with it, and where it's on top of mind in the Strides Collective of like, how do we, from the ground up, since we're just starting, right? So how do we just make that a part of our work? It's not like,
Exactly.
oh, we need to go back and, rectify certain things, or it's like, nope, this is just going to be ingrained in what we do. So it just becomes that like quote unquote normal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sort of opportunities we want to give people. And those conversations have been happening probably for the past like 10 months on a public grand scale. They've obviously been happening for a much longer time than that, but it's been sort of amazing to watch and see the movement. And people have used this period of shutdown, particularly in Broadway professional theater, to re-examine a lot of things. And of course, we've yet to see the actual outcome of a lot of these things because Broadway's still closed and theater's not open yet. But a lot of work has started, and there's a shit ton more to do in every area. It's not just theater. I think every industry is facing this, rightfully so. And it's a promising start, I think, but so much more to go. And again, there's a lot you can read. I think We See White American Theater, and I can send you a link to what I'm talking about, so you can put it.
We'll have it in our show notes, but
yeah,
totally. Thank you for summarizing it up. I just wanted to tell, just for clarification for everybody. And I personally think that, just having, such a collective just as this, like someone outside of theater would, be like, oh, well, isn't it, like, again, their projections of not knowing, like, onto it. And so, getting back to you and yourself, like so with the Strides Collective and with your journey as a playwright and as a director, like, do you feel that everything's kind of come full circle?
I do. I had a experience. So I did like I said earlier, I did the Jersey Fringe Festival 2 summers in a row. The first with a play called Strides, the second with a play called Whirlpool, and we were in the same venue both times. And the second year, there was one performance where I was sitting in the audience and people were like chatting around me, and they were talking about like, there was a group of friends saying like, oh, do you remember the show that was here last year? We fucking loved that show. It was so cool. I wonder if this show is by the same person. And someone was like, yeah, it is. And these people were really excited. And I was blown away that anybody would ever care about any story I have to tell enough to come back, enough to like be excited to like see the same person has written this, knowing that like, oh, this is going to be a cool, dope, like modern queer story. Like that was, I don't like being sentimental or cheesy, but like that was definitely a huge sentimental moment for me of like, if someone had told like, 12-year-old Jonathan this, he would just not even comprehend like the words you're saying, that somebody would care about his stories and his experience sort of dramatized in this way. And now that I'm slowly, again, we're just such at the beginning of what we're doing, and I have such high hopes, so we'll see where it goes. But the idea that I could uplift other queer artists in whatever small platform I have, with whatever like minuscule budget we're throwing together, like if I can support them, that would be really awesome for me. And I do think in a lot of ways I've sort of come full circle, and now I'm like going to keep riding the momentum forward and helping others in the way that people have helped me, and to continue to develop my own work as an artist too. And I'm excited to see where it goes, and thankful that again, thankful that anyone cares. I think being an artist is one of those things where it's one thing to do it in your room alone. It's one thing to have all these things on your laptop, but when you put it in front of people and they respond positively, even if they respond negatively, like they're there and they're absorbing it and they have an iota of care, even if it's just in that moment. And like, that's really gratifying. And that's not like the reason to do it, but it's a nice motivation to continue forward, knowing that your work is impacting people and reaching people in some way.
Absolutely. And I think that it's just, especially with such a community, everything, all arts are community based, all music is community based. I was telling my friend and my boyfriend the other day that, one of the last shows that I went to go see before the lockdown happened was for my 24th birthday. I bought my dad and I tickets to a Flogging Molly show because I just really wanted to see a concert with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And like looking back, that wasn't the last show that I saw, but it's one of the most special shows in my heart. And it's like looking back at everything, like I miss the shows and I miss the community. But again, like the fact that, like, what you said, that, oh, people are receiving this one way or another and they're receptive to it one way or another. Like Gigless, people are going to see this, people are going to hear this, people are going to be inspired by this. And I think that, like, same thing with what you said about inner child work, like we all look back and say, like 12-year-old me would be like, shut up. Like, no way.
Totally.
Yeah. But, again, these, to bring up these stories in such a way that they're being uplifted by the people that have lived similar ones to them, and they are being produced with a form of respect, instead of like, how much queerness can we force into a character and project, and then that one character is going to carry throughout the whole, because if we have two, they'll cancel each other out, like.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
again, like I think that's completely, you know I think that that's just like a beautiful thing. And one of the things I want to ask you is, like, who's the, like, I don't know if you ask age, but what is the youngest um person that has applied to your emerging playwrights virtual residency?
We have some college students. We're keeping it 18 plus. So we
Mm-hmm.
definitely have some college students, and we purposely use the language emerging to support anybody who is sort of entering the playwriting field, who it sort of doesn't matter your age. There are certainly people I know who have retired from their careers and are now beginning playwriting, and they are emerging artists, and we will support them as much as we'll support an 18-year-old, a freshman in college. So we're really excited about that. I will say, along the same lines, we've had some what I have projected to be like high school students who have seen our work, and to see them get excited about queer theater is like really fucking awesome, because again, that's the type of stuff that I would have like killed to see when I was their age. So like, if we can keep doing that and create theater that can touch that generation too, like that is really cool, and that gets me super excited about doing this work. Yeah.
Well, I'm sad to say, but we're in the last 5 minutes of this interview because it goes by so fast all the time. Uh, what are some of your last thoughts that you want to say to the listeners out in Gigless land?
I'm just so excited about the Strides Collective and all of the work that we have planned. A virtual emerging playwrights residency is going to kick off in March once we select our playwrights. We're going to develop work via Zoom, and that's going to be really awesome. We are in the planning stages of another virtual production that will be accessible to everyone and anyone. So we are excited to kind of put that out into the world later in the spring, hold auditions soon and things like that. So I'm just really like pumped by that. And also I desperately miss live theater at the same time. And I cannot wait until we can gather again and see theater. I think like my friends and I talk about it now of like, the first show back that we all see, like, we're probably just gonna like spend most of it crying, just because it's not something that you ever thought. I mean, and why would you? You never thought it would be like taken away from you. You never thought that like, oh, this will be the last chance I get to see like a musical in person for X amount of time. It's wild to think that way. So I can't wait for that to come back, but I'm thankful for the time and the space that I have now with these artists to do what we can do in this period and keep creating and give opportunities to artists who need a little platform.
Absolutely. I was trying to think back to the last play that I saw, and it was a musical. I think the last like professional play was Lion King. The last ballet was Whipped Cream by the American Ballet Theater. And then the last, oh God, I think, and then like I saw plays at like Rutgers University Camden for like class and stuff. I think that was about it. Unfortunately, I never got to see any plays in Philadelphia, but I am very, like, when I heard about just how great, I was like, man, I'm missing out so much because I was always at school, like I was always working on stuff, but I definitely want to go back to Philly and truly experience Philly from the arts, like 100%, because I did First Fridays. I did all that, like, you know, the museums and stuff, but like I want to get more into the music area of it. I want to get more into the theater area of it. And that's something that I'm definitely looking forward to doing once everything is safe and I can travel and go from place to place.
Totally. I think a lot of people also will just the value and the excitement of live art, music venues, operas, ballets, theater, it will be sort of re-energized in our society. I think, again, it's something that people take for granted because it has always been here. And there's usually like all of these shows a year and you have so many options. And then if you just don't go for a year, it's like whatever. But now I have high hopes that people will really be like, I got to make sure I go see that, because like that could be the only opportunity I have to see that particular production, that particular artist. So when we get to that point, I'm excited for people to re-engage with live art in that way. I think it'll be exciting.
Yes, and I definitely wanted to say to all listeners out there, when shows are available, once again, I don't care if it says like limited seating or limited view or whatever, it's obscure view, go see the show.
Absolutely.
Like it doesn't, like the American Ballet Theater play that I went to go see, it was a total last minute buy. I think I spent $60 for 2 people. It was like totally last minute, but you know, I got to see American Ballet Theater. Like, even though we were obscured and like we went like hanging off the rail, you know, we still were able to like see this awesome, beautiful production. And I think that a lot of people, especially like in the local scene in New Jersey, like a lot of people miss like their local plays and the theater season itself, because that involves so many people, from musicians to costume designers to directors to local like schools and such being involved. Like it's such a gathering point for a community.
It absolutely is. It's a huge community experience, and that is a really good point. Like when things open up, to support your local, small, non-professional, but still like amount of time that goes into that shit, it might as well be professional. You know, people devote so much time and energy in their local communities doing so. Like go see shows around you. Go to Philly and New York too, but also see shows like near you locally, because they need the support too. Especially when we come back, those small theaters are going to need the support more than anything.
I don't think that there's been like, and this is me being 100% honest, I don't think there's ever been like a bad theater show that I've seen. Like a lot of the shows that I've seen that were local theater, Dane, our producer, he's been in pit orchestras before. Like he had all these gigs lined up for the musical season before coronavirus hit, because you know it was March, everybody was assembling that time. And I, you know, he, you know, I would always go and support him as a friend, and I would bring my brother, or I would bring another friend, or we as collectives would all go see like everything. I think the only bad reaction I've ever seen to local theater was we went to Dane was in the pit orchestra for the production of Hair.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that point where like the dude was taking his shirt off to like be crucified and stuff, and like his dad and his son just got up and like left.
Yeah.
But other than that, like,
yeah,
it's
totally.
been good.
Yeah, people, I mean, they're just people who do theater, especially in a local level. They do it just because they love it and are passionate about it. They don't get paid usually. It's just because it's in their heart and they want to share a story with people. So it's always a great thing to support.
Absolutely. So, Jonathan, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so you can find the Strides Collective work on Instagram at the Strides Collective, and our website is stridescollective.com. It's a work in progress, but that's where we'll be. And yeah, definitely check us out. Also on Facebook, the Strides Collective. We're going to be talking about our spring show coming up very soon. And again, it'll be virtual, so you can watch it from your home. And we're really excited to share that with everyone.
Absolutely. So we will put all the links to the Strides Collective in our in our show notes. And I thank you so much for being on this episode of Giggles.
Yeah, thank you. It was awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Giggles podcast, hosted by Remi Leibovic and produced by Dane Wagner. The song used in our intro and outro is Beach Walk by Unicorn Heads. If you enjoyed this podcast, head over to our social media pages on Instagram at Giggles Podcast and our website, gigglespodcastblog.wordpress.com. There you can find out more about the artist, contact the host and producer, and find out more about our schedule. Thank you.